At 2:01 a.m., in the cold service tunnels beneath the five-star Aurora Royal Hotel, CEO Ethan Ward witnessed something that shattered 15 years of certainty about the empire he had built. The air down here always carried a metallic chill, an old, tired breath rising from concrete walls that had seen decades of footsteps, but never sunlight. It was the kind of cold that didn't simply sit on the skin. It seeped inward, into bone, into memory. Tonight, it felt as if the entire underbelly of the hotel was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Ethan walked slowly, his footsteps muted by the rubber soles he had chosen deliberately to avoid echoing down the narrow corridor. He wore no tailored suit, no silk tie, only a dark coat with the collar turned up, the uniform of a man hiding from his own authority. He had dismissed the night guard with a simple excuse and descended into the tunnels with a purpose he had not admitted out loud. Aurora Royal was the crown jewel of his career, his pride, the proof that he had once clawed his way out of obscurity to build something the world respected. The hotel glimmered on travel magazines and award lists. Everything about it, from the marble columns in the lobby to the imported linens in every suite, was designed to speak of luxury, precision, and order. Especially order. Ethan believed in systems, in discipline, in numbers that told neat stories he could verify. But over the past weeks, those numbers had begun to whisper something off-key. Small discrepancies, missing linens, unusual consumption of cleaning supplies, food waste that didn't match the kitchen logs, energy usage spiking at odd hours. Little things, too small for guests to notice, too scattered for managers to see. Yet every anomaly, every red dot on his internal reports pointed back to one name: Miguel Alvarez, night cleaner. The lowest paid position in the building. A man whose English was shaky, whose file showed no degrees, no qualifications beyond hard working. A man whose shift began when the city slept, when executives like Ethan were already heading home. The kind of man the world rarely questioned and almost never noticed. Managers muttered about him. The CFO suggested petty theft. The housekeeping director said Miguel touched things he shouldn't touch. Ethan listened and said nothing. He had always mistrusted gossip, but he trusted patterns. And Miguel showed up in too many patterns. That was why he was here now. Following the cleaner through the guts of the hotel, past old pipes that hummed like low, distant machinery, through the dim network of back corridors that guests never saw. From a distance, Ethan could see Miguel pushing a cleaning cart. The man walked with a slight weariness in his shoulders, the weight of someone juggling two jobs, or perhaps two lives. His gray uniform was faded, threadbare in places. When he paused beneath a weak overhead light, Ethan could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the kind carved by years of exhaustion rather than a single long night. Miguel entered the cold storage room. Ethan moved closer, staying behind a stack of cardboard boxes. Miguel picked up a few cartons of milk nearing expiration, then selected several bread rolls that had been marked for disposal. He inspected each item carefully, almost respectfully. It didn't look like stealing. Yet Ethan was too seasoned, too hardened to trust the softness of a first impression. Miguel next went to the linen storeroom, retrieving 2 frayed blankets, a couple of worn towels, and a handful of tiny hotel soaps, items scheduled to be thrown out during next week's supply refresh. None of them had value to the hotel anymore. But to someone else? Ethan wasn't sure. He only knew that numbers didn't lie, and numbers had led him here, to the narrow hallway outside the laundry room, where Miguel paused, glanced around, and pushed open a small dented metal door near the far wall, one even most managers didn't know existed. Ethan steadied his breath and followed. But when he reached the doorway and looked in, the world he had built on data and discipline cracked in a single, silent moment. On the floor, On cold, stained tiles lay 7 hotel employees, the forgotten kind, the invisible kind. A young housekeeper from the Philippines, curled beneath a flattened cardboard box. A dishwasher barely 20, his arms streaked with burns from long shifts in the kitchen. A middle-aged laundry worker whose knees had long since given out. A couple from Guatemala, collapsed against one another after another 14-hour day. They were sleeping. Not in beds, not in rooms, but on the floor. Miguel set down the supplies with a gentleness Ethan hadn't expected from anyone working a thankless night shift. He placed a blanket over the older man's shoulders, tucking the edges as if tucking in a child. He laid the milk and bread near the young dishwasher, shook a malfunctioning portable heater until it buzzed back to life, and wiped the forehead of the housekeeper who had fallen asleep, gripping a cleaning rag. There was no greed in his movements, no secrecy born of guilt, only care, human, unvarnished care. Ethan stood frozen, struck speechless by the gravity of what he was seeing. He had expected theft. He had expected deceit. He had expected a problem with a neat managerial solution. He had not expected this. He had not expected to find the beating, desperate heart of the hotel hidden here, in the shadows he had never bothered to walk through. Miguel rose slowly, rubbing his lower back with a quiet sigh. Then he turned, and his gaze collided with Ethan's. For a long moment, neither man moved. Miguel's eyes widened, not in guilt, but in fear. The fear of someone who had nothing left to lose except the fragile shelter he had tried so hard to protect for others. Ethan's expression, illuminated by a flickering fluorescent tube, betrayed a rare fracture in his composure. His world, the one he controlled with spreadsheets and protocols, had suddenly, violently, become too small to contain what he saw. Ethan parted his lips as if to speak, but the words would not form. Miguel lowered his head, bracing as if for a blow he had long expected. In the silence between them, Ethan heard, for the first time, a question he had never once allowed inside his mind. What if the real theft wasn't happening in these tunnels, but in the system he had built above them? The thought struck him with the force of a truth he had spent years avoiding, a truth that now pressed cold fingers to his spine. And in that quiet, suspended instant, a hairline fracture appeared across the polished veneer of the CEO Ethan believed himself to be, a fracture that would widen, pull, and eventually split open everything he thought he understood. For a long, breathless moment, neither man moved. The narrow room, half storage closet, half refuge, seemed to shrink around them, its dim yellow light trembling against cracked tiles and weary bodies. Miguel stood as if bracing for punishment he had already accepted. Ethan stood as if the floor beneath him had shifted, leaving him unsure where to place his weight. The CEO had walked these tunnels expecting deceit, expecting pettiness, expecting a neat cause for every missing towel and miscounted supply. But what he found was something entirely different, something raw and painfully human. The kind of truth that doesn't announce itself with numbers or spreadsheets, but with the rise and fall of a tired chest on a cold floor. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice cracked in a way that startled even him. What exactly are you doing here?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even anger. It was confusion, almost fragile, as if the question itself might crumble with too much force. Miguel lifted his eyes slowly. Those eyes were darker than the tunnels around them, deep, quiet, weathered by years of invisible labor. He looked at Ethan not the way an employee looks at a superior, but the way a man looks at someone who has stumbled into a part of the world he never knew existed. "I help them," Miguel said softly, his English broken but steady, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and conviction. "They, no home, No bed. No money. They work. Too long. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the sleeping forms on the floor, as if Ethan might have mistaken them for something else. Crates, maybe, or forgotten laundry. Ethan's throat tightened. They sleep here? In the hotel? Miguel nodded. Yes. Too far. Too expensive. Too tired. Ethan looked again, this time not as a CEO, but as a man trying to understand how such a thing could exist beneath the marble and crystal chandeliers he proudly showed investors. Their blankets were old linens the hotel had thrown away weeks ago. Their pillows were folded towels. Their shoes, worn, cracked, some held together with tape, lined the wall like offerings. 5-star service above. 5 bodies on a cold floor below. The contrast hit Ethan with the force of a truth he had never considered. Why didn't anyone report this? He whispered, more to himself than to Miguel. But Miguel answered anyway, because he understood the question in ways Ethan never had to. No one listen, he said. People like me, like them, invisible. That word again. Invisible. It cut deeper this time. Ethan felt it slide under his ribs, settle in the hollow place he rarely acknowledged, the place where guilt lived, and loneliness, and the weight of decisions signed in ink but written on real lives. Miguel crouched beside one of the workers, a middle-aged man whose breath rattled faintly in his sleep, and adjusted the blanket around him. The gesture was small, but somehow it carried more dignity than anything Ethan had seen in his boardroom in years. You took supplies, Ethan managed, though the accusation had lost its shape. Food. Linens. Miguel shook his head. Not take. Trash. He pointed gently. The milk. Expire tomorrow. They throw. The bread. Not serve. The blankets. Old. No good for rooms. The soap. Too many. Always too many. He spread his hands, palms up, a universal sign of truth. Trash for hotel, he murmured. Life for us. The sentence struck Ethan like a blow. Trash for hotel. Life for us. How many things had Ethan dismissed as minor losses, write-offs, cost of doing business? Had he ever wondered who truly paid the price for his decisions? His chest tightened. He wasn't used to emotions rising like this. He had trained himself long ago to be unmoved by stories, convinced they distracted from the numbers that told the truth. But tonight, the numbers were the lie, and the stories were the truth. How long have you been doing this? Ethan asked quietly. Miguel hesitated, then answered, his voice thinning. Since my wife died. Ethan's breath caught. The air felt colder. I'm sorry, he said instinctively, and the sincerity of it surprised him. Miguel gave a small, tired shrug, the kind of shrug a man gives when grief has lived with him so long it no longer startles him. She's sick. Very sick. Hospital too expensive. I work every hour. But... He stopped there, as if finishing the sentence might reopen a wound he barely kept closed. Ethan didn't need the rest. He understood. And then Miguel added quietly, Before she die, she say to me, help people who have no one. So, I try. Only small things. Only what I can. He pointed at the carton of milk, the bread, the blanket. Small. Ethan felt his throat tighten again. He turned away for a moment, eyes stinging with something he refused to name. Grief, shame, or maybe just the first spark of empathy that had been crushed under years of corporate efficiency. Why didn't you tell someone? He asked, even though he knew the answer. Miguel let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. "Tell who? Manager cut hours if complain. Pay wrong if complain. Some, no papers. Some, no English. They scared. Always scared." He paused. "If manager know they sleep here, they fire. Fire them, fire me. Then they sleep outside." The simplicity of it was devastating. Miguel wasn't stealing. He was preserving humanity in the only way he knew how. Ethan looked around again, slower this time, letting the truth settle. These weren't criminals hiding from responsibility. They were workers hiding from a system that had let them fall through its cracks, a system he had built. Ethan's pulse quickened. His vision narrowed. "What is your daughter's name?" he asked suddenly, remembering the little girl he had seen earlier that evening waiting for Miguel near the employee entrance. Miguel blinked, surprised by the question. "Leah," he said softly. "She ate." Ethan felt something shift inside him. If Miguel were fired, if the workers were thrown out, where would Leah sleep? What would she eat? What would become of a little girl who already carried the silence of loss in her small shoulders? Ethan didn't dare imagine it. Miguel straightened, brushing the dust from his knees. He met Ethan's gaze evenly. "I know you think I steal," he said. "If you fire me, okay, but please, let them stay tonight. Just tonight." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I didn't come down here to fire you," he whispered at last, though hours ago that had been exactly his plan. Miguel stared at him, confused. "I don't know what comes next," Ethan admitted. "But it won't happen here. Not in front of them." He gestured toward the sleeping workers. "And not like this." Miguel looked at him as if trying to decipher the truth behind his words. Trust did not come easily to him. But something in Ethan's voice, some crack of sincerity, seemed to reach him. The heater buzzed softly, fighting the cold. Someone shifted in their sleep, murmuring in another language. And somewhere deep in the building above them, a distant elevator hummed like a reminder of the luxury that thrived on the hidden exhaustion below. Ethan stepped back, one foot, then another, until he stood in the doorway again. His heart felt heavy, as if carrying the weight of a revelation he wasn't prepared to understand. Miguel didn't follow. He watched. Two men, two worlds, bound suddenly by a secret neither had expected to share. Ethan turned toward the main corridor, the cold swallowing him as he walked. Each step echoed differently now, less like authority, more like reckoning. He didn't know where this truth would lead, only that it demanded to be faced. And as he climbed the narrow maintenance stairs, the dim light trembling above him, his mind carried the weight of an unspoken promise, one that would begin to unfold the moment he reached his office. Ethan's footsteps carried him upward through the groaning metal staircase, each step ringing faintly in the silence, as if the building itself were trying to warn him. You can't unsee what you've seen. He emerged from the maintenance stairwell into the back corridor of the staff floor, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. It was a world he had always considered familiar, sterile, orderly, predictable. But tonight, it felt distorted, as if someone had shifted the frame by a single degree, making everything slightly off-center. He walked through the hallway with a weight he couldn't yet name. The polished tiles reflected his shadow in broken, uneven fragments. He had always moved with purpose through this hotel, his hotel, like a conductor navigating an orchestra built from marble, chrome, and impeccable service. But now, he felt like an intruder in a place he thought he understood. He reached the private elevator, swiped his master key card, and stepped inside. The doors closed with a soft hush, sealing him into a floating metal box that shuddered upward through the floors. The soft instrumental music, something elegant, something expensive, suddenly sounded hollow, manufactured. A soundtrack for people who lived on levels above the truths hidden in the basement. Ethan's reflection in the mirrored elevator wall startled him. The man staring back was not the untouchable executive he was used to seeing. His hair was mussed from the cold tunnels. His collar was crooked. His eyes, usually sharp with focus, looked unsettled, as if they had swallowed more than they could digest. He leaned forward, pressing both palms to the cool mirror. For years, he had prided himself on knowing every inch of Aurora Royal. Every budget line, every operational process, every inefficiency. Yet, he had never once stepped into that small, forgotten room where 7 employees slept in secret. "I didn't know," he whispered to his own reflection, as if testing a truth he wasn't ready to fully claim. "I didn't know." But even as the words escaped his lips, shame tightened around him, quiet and merciless. Because not knowing was not the same as innocence. Not knowing was simply the privilege of someone who never had to look. The elevator chimed softly. The doors opened to the executive floor, where the world smelled of leather and imported coffee, not detergent and fatigue. The hallway carpets muffled his steps, a stark contrast to the echoing tiles below. Ethan unlocked his office and stepped inside. The space felt larger than usual. Too large. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city's lights shimmering below, Chicago glowing like a constellation of ambitions he once believed in wholeheartedly. His desk sat in the middle of the room, immaculate as always, papers aligned, pens parallel, laptop centered like an altar to efficiency. But tonight, nothing felt aligned. Ethan sank into the leather chair and stared at the screen. The hotel's internal dashboard glowed in cool blue. Rows of numbers scrolled past. Inventory counts, labor hours, energy usage graphs. So neat, so precise, so incomplete. With a few clicks, he pulled up the housekeeping department logs. There it was again. Overtime discrepancies. Schedule reductions without authorization. Warnings issued by mid-level managers without formal documentation. He opened the wage records. The truth stabbed sharper this time. Some employees, those same ones sleeping on the floor, had missing hours. Entire shifts marked as low yield, thus unpaid. Meal breaks logged that he was now certain had never happened. Performance flags added by supervisors who had never met the workers they judged. And then he saw something else. A proposal from 2 years ago. Employee dormitory and overnight rest facility, Phase 1, stamped with his digital signature. Approved. And beneath it, a handwritten comment from the CFO scanned into the system. Not essential. Postpone until further directive. Ethan's countersignature beneath it. Agreed. Defer. He closed his eyes. The worst part was that he remembered none of it. How easy it had been to dismiss a housing proposal as a budget item. How easy to trust the CFO's bulleted lists without asking whose lives those bullets pierced. How easy to forget that efficiency was often extracted from exhaustion, just not his own. Ethan leaned back, feeling the leather creak softly beneath him. For the first time in years, the silence of his office was not soothing. It was suffocating. His mind drifted back to that fragile room in the basement, to the slow, tired breaths of workers who had given their youth, their bodies, their hope to a company that barely saw them, to Miguel kneeling beside each of them with a gentleness that had nothing to do with job responsibilities, to the way Miguel's voice trembled when he spoke of his late wife, to the word that kept echoing inside him, invisible. Ethan stood and walked toward the window. Below him, Chicago's lights flickered like a river of stars trapped behind glass. How small people looked from this height. How easy it was to forget that each light was a life, a story, a burden. A memory surfaced, one Ethan had not visited in years. He was 13, sitting in the doorway of a cramped apartment while his mother scrubbed floors after her shift at a diner. She never complained, never asked for help, but he remembered the way her hands shook when she finally sat down at night. He remembered promising himself he would rise above all of it, that he would never live at the mercy of anyone's paycheck again. He had kept that promise. He had risen. But somewhere along the climb he had begun to resemble the men his mother once worked for, the ones who never learned her name. The realization hit him like a second grief. A soft, vibrating sound snapped him back, a notification on his screen. Ethan returned to his desk. Incident report, 12:54 a.m. Minor electrical fluctuation. Laundry room. Supervisor note, night crew caused this. They leave lights on. Will deduct from their hours. He felt anger rise. Not the cold, sharp anger he used to wield in boardrooms, but a warm, human anger that trembled. They blamed the night crew for everything. They blamed the people who had the least power to defend themselves, and no one, not even the CEO, had bothered to question it. Ethan closed the report and sat still for several seconds. Then he opened a blank document, a new file. He typed the title slowly, deliberately. Internal Review, Labor Practices, Immediate Priority. His fingers hovered above the keys. What came next would not be simple. It would not be safe. It would not be clean. If he tore into the system, he would be tearing into the very structure he had built, the careers he had promoted, the managers he had trusted. He would become the enemy of the comfortable. For a moment, doubt whispered, "Is this worth it? These aren't your battles. These aren't your people." But then he saw Miguel again, standing in the dim light, offering bread and warmth like a man who knew what dignity cost. And he saw Leah, the little girl waiting patiently at the staff entrance, trusting that her father would always come back. "Yes," Ethan whispered. "It's worth it." He looked around his office once more, the tidy desk, the glass awards, the certificates of excellence on the wall. They all felt smaller now, fragile. He wasn't sure whether he had outgrown them, or they had simply lost their shine. Ethan closed the laptop. He wasn't ready to confront his managers yet. Not tonight. But he knew where he had to go before the night ended. He needed to return to the basement, not for answers, but for honesty. For a second look at the truth he had only glimpsed through the doorway. For a conversation he owed to the man who had shown him humanity where he least expected it. He reached for his coat, and as he stepped out of his office, walking toward the elevator with the weight of a man about to rewrite the architecture of his own life, the building seemed to thrum around him, quiet, breathless, waiting. The service elevator hummed a low, uncertain tune as it descended, carrying Ethan back toward the underbelly of a world he had long pretended did not exist. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting pale stripes across his face like the remnants of an old confession. He stood still, hands in the pockets of his coat, posture tense with a mix of resolve and fear, the fear of returning not to danger but to truth. When the doors slid open, the air shifted instantly. Up above, the hotel breathed warm notes of luxury, jasmine from the lobby diffusers, fresh linen, roasted espresso. Down here, the air was colder, sharper. It smelled of detergent, metal, exhaustion, and something else he couldn't quite name. Something tender, something human. Ethan walked the dim corridor, guided only by memory and the faint hum of old pipes overhead. Each step felt heavier than the last. He had spent years crafting a persona built on authority, control, competence. But down here, that persona felt useless. What mattered was not the CEO of Aurora Royal, but the boy who once watched his mother scrub floors until her fingers bled. He reached the small metal door at the far end of the laundry wing, the door Miguel had slipped through hours earlier. Ethan paused, his breath catching. A part of him wanted to turn back, to return to the comfort of marble and quiet offices, where problems came printed neatly in reports and solutions required only signatures. But those worlds were illusions now. The truth was waiting behind this door. He pressed his palm lightly against the metal and pushed. Warmth greeted him first, not the warmth of heating systems, but the warmth of human bodies clustered together, sharing thin air and thinner hope. The battery lanterns cast wide, trembling halos across the tiled floor. 6 of the workers were asleep. One stirred at the sound of the door, eyes half opening before drifting closed again. Their breaths rose and fell like fragile waves in a shrinking sea. Miguel was awake. He sat on an overturned crate, elbows resting on his knees, head lowered. When Ethan stepped inside, the man lifted his gaze slowly, as if bracing for impact before he knew the force. "Mr. Ward," Miguel said softly. His voice held no anger, only a weary alertness. "I thought you left for the night." Ethan swallowed. His throat felt tight, too tight for authority, just tight enough for truth. "I couldn't," he replied. "Not after what I saw." Miguel studied him, searching for the hidden hook, the inevitable accusation. Ethan could practically feel it, the man's instinctive readiness to be blamed, dismissed, punished. A lifetime of employers who looked at him and saw only limits. A world that never learned to offer him safety without cost. Ethan stepped further inside. He lowered his voice instinctively, careful not to wake those sleeping. "You said earlier that this isn't your home," Ethan murmured. "Yet everything about your actions tells me you've been carrying responsibility for all of them." Miguel looked away. "I'm just helping my co-workers," he said quietly. "Nothing more." "That's not nothing," Ethan said. "Not even close." Silence settled between them, not empty, but full, like a tide waiting to break. Ethan moved closer, slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal that might flee or fight or collapse at a single careless gesture. "Tell me how it started," he said. "Please." Miguel hesitated. He stared at the sleeping bodies around them. Then he exhaled, long and tired. 4 months ago, he began, voice low. Anna, she works laundry, was evicted when her landlord raised the rent. Too much, too fast. She slept in a supply closet for a week before I found out. Ethan felt a spark of shame strike. Miguel continued. Then Luis. His hours were cut, but the kitchen expected the same workload. He couldn't afford his bus pass, so he started staying late, sleeping near the washers. The words were steady, but the pain behind them was not. One by one, Miguel said, they lost something, a home, their strength, their hope. This room is the only place in the building where the night staff isn't kicked out for resting, so we made it ours. His voice trembled, not with self-pity, but with the rawness of remembering. I bring blankets, Miguel said. Food that would be thrown away. Soap no guest will miss. I'm not stealing, He looked down at his hands. I'm just trying to make sure they survive the night. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something like recognition, something like grief. You shouldn't have had to do any of this alone, Ethan whispered. Miguel laughed softly, a sound so bitter and quiet it barely counted as laughter. People like us, Miguel said. We're always alone, Mr. Ward. Ethan shook his head. Not tonight. Miguel looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. His eyes were dark, unguarded, filled with a quiet, painful hope he was clearly afraid to trust. "Why are you here?" Miguel asked. "Truly." Ethan exhaled, and the truth came out stripped of every layer. "Because I've been blind," he said softly. "Because I let a system grow under my name that hurts the very people who hold this hotel together. Because you showed me something I never had the courage to see on my own." Miguel stared, stunned into silence. "I came," Ethan continued, "not to accuse you, but to ask for guidance." Miguel's eyebrows knit. "Guidance?" "Yes," Ethan said. "I want you to tell me what they need, what's missing, what has been broken for too long. I can't fix a world I don't understand." Miguel looked away, eyes shining with something fragile. "My English," he whispered. "Sometimes it's hard for me to explain things." "You've explained more in one night," Ethan replied, "than my management has in 5 years. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Miguel asked quietly, "And if I tell you the truth? Will anything change?" Ethan felt his answer settle in his bones before it reached his lips. "Yes," he said, "because I won't let this hotel be built on someone else's suffering anymore. Not when I can see it. Not when I can stop it." Miguel looked at the sleeping workers again. His expression softened, tilting toward a belief he didn't yet dare to name. "They trust me," Miguel said. "Not the managers, not the supervisors, me. If you change things, you can't break their trust." "I won't," Ethan said. "You have my word." Miguel searched his face, weighing the words with the caution of a man who had seen too much to trust easily. But something in Ethan's voice, something raw, something newly born, must have reached him. "Then I'll tell you," Miguel whispered. "Everything." Ethan nodded slowly. As the lanterns flickered gently, casting soft light across tired bodies and tired hearts, Ethan felt the shift fully now, the tectonic truth that he was no longer simply observing the hidden life of his hotel. He was entering it. And once you enter someone's truth, you can never return to ignorance. Outside, the night pressed quietly against the small window, but inside, something warmer had begun to rise. Not hope yet, but the beginning of it. A beginning that would demand action, confrontation, honesty. And as Miguel opened his mouth to speak, the first fragile threads of what came next began to form in the dim, flickering light. Morning arrived without softness. The sun tried to break through the winter haze, but its pale light felt thin, fragile, like a truth not yet ready to be believed. Ethan stepped out of his apartment with a heaviness that clung to him like a second coat. He had barely slept, spending the hours before dawn sifting through documents, contracts, archived messages, and years of internal communications he had once skimmed without thought. He had expected disorganization. He had not expected a quiet architecture of neglect. By the time he reached the Aurora Royal's revolving doors, he had already rehearsed 2 versions of the day ahead, one in which he confronted his managers directly, and one in which he did something far more dangerous. Listened first. The lobby was warm and immaculate, sunlight shimmering on the marble floor like a polished lie. Guests strolled leisurely toward breakfast, staff moved with professional rhythm, and everything looked perfect. Perfect enough that someone who hadn't spent last night in the hotel's underbelly might have believed perfection was the truth. Ethan no longer believed it. His assistant, Grace, spotted him the moment he stepped inside. "Good morning, Mr. Ward," she said with her usual brightness before pausing. "Sir, you look tired?" Ethan offered gently. Grace nodded, startled by his tone, softer than usual, less guarded. "Yes, but also different." He didn't answer. He simply gestured for her to walk with him to the executive elevators. She handed him the morning briefing, the usual list of operational notes, meeting schedules, and reports that used to anchor his mornings. But today, the pages felt strangely thin in his hands, flimsy compared to the weight he carried from the night before. Grace cleared her throat. "Sir, there's something else. The housekeeping director requested another meeting about the night staff. She submitted a complaint file this morning." Ethan stopped walking. "What complaint?" "A repeated issue, sir. She says the night cleaners are disregarding protocols and using supplies improperly. She wants authorization to begin disciplinary procedures." Ethan felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him, as if the hotel itself were shifting under the pressure of truth. "What supplies?" he asked quietly. "Blankets," Grace said. "Some towels, a few kitchen items." She hesitated. She believes the night cleaner, Miguel, is responsible. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Of course she does. "Schedule the meeting," he said. "Yes, sir." Grace glanced at him sideways. "Is there something I should prepare?" "No," Ethan replied. "Just the truth." The elevator ride to the top floor was long and silent. Ethan's thoughts moved through the night like a slow tide. Miguel's quiet voice, the handwritten list, the exhausted bodies curled on cold tiles. He had entered that room as a man who suspected theft. He had left it as a man who recognized a far deeper crime, one he had unknowingly allowed. When he reached the executive floor, the housekeeping director was already waiting outside his office. A rigid woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper posture, Ms. Hammond believed in order the way others believed in prayer. "Mr. Ward," she said briskly, "thank you for meeting with me. We have a growing issue downstairs." Ethan unlocked his office door but didn't enter. Instead, he crossed his arms, meeting her gaze with a calm that seemed to unsettle her. "Before we discuss anything," he said, "I want you to tell me, when was the last time you inspected the night shift in person?" Ms. Hammond blinked. "Well, I oversee all schedules and reports." "That's not what I asked." She shifted, her jaw tightening. "The night shift operates outside my hours." "So you haven't seen it," Ethan said quietly. "Not with your own eyes. Not once." "That's irrelevant." "It's very relevant," he interrupted, "because you're recommending disciplinary action based on a version of the truth shaped entirely by paperwork." His voice dropped. "Paperwork can lie, Ms. Hammond. People rarely do." She stiffened. "I assure you, sir, the night staff has been bending rules for months. They've been—" "Trying to survive," Ethan cut in. Her lips parted slightly, as though the simple clarity of the sentence shocked her more than any accusation could have. Ethan stepped closer, not threateningly, but with a gravity that left no room for deflection. "I went downstairs last night," he said softly, "to the service tunnels, to the laundry wing. I saw where the night crew sleeps. I saw what they endure." Her face drained of color. "No one is supposed to be sleeping there," she whispered. "Why do you think they're doing it?" Ethan asked. "For convenience? For pleasure? Because they're lazy?" Ms. Hammond opened her mouth, but no words emerged. "They sleep there," Ethan continued, "because they cannot afford rent, because their hours are cut, because they are punished for resting. Because the rules we've allowed to stand have become chains around the people who hold this building together." Ms. Hammond's eyes flickered. Guilt, denial, fear, all tangled. "This is a 5-star hotel," she insisted weakly. "We cannot operate without standards." "No," Ethan agreed. "But standards without humanity are cruelty, and I won't allow cruelty to wear this hotel's name anymore." Ms. Hammond's voice faltered. "What are you planning to do?" "First," Ethan said, "I'm stopping all disciplinary actions against the night staff." Effective immediately. She inhaled sharply, indignation rising. Second, Ethan went on, unshaken, I will conduct a full review of labor practices, hours, breaks, supervisory conduct, and compensation. Her eyes widened in alarm. And third, Ethan finished, I will meet with the night staff myself. All of them. Ms. Hammond's composure cracked like thin ice under weight. Sir, if you start bending rules for the night shift. This isn't bending rules, Ethan said, voice steady. It's correcting them. Ms. Hammond stared at him, trying to understand the version of her CEO who stood before her, a man she did not recognize, a man who no longer saw numbers as absolutes or protocols as shields. When she realized she was losing the argument, she lowered her eyes. I'll prepare the updated logs, she murmured. Do that, Ethan said. And Ms. Hammond, she looked up. From now on, treat every employee as if their dignity is part of your job, because it is. She nodded slowly, quietly, then left. Ethan closed his office door behind him and exhaled. His hands were trembling, not from fear, from certainty. For the first time in his life, certainty felt like courage rather than control. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and began drafting the internal memo that would reroute the current of the entire hotel. Each word felt like moving a stone into place, like rebuilding a foundation one careful block at a time. He wasn't naive. He knew resistance would come, from supervisors, from management, from those who saw compassion as weakness. But he also knew this. The only thing more dangerous than changing a broken system was leaving it broken. As he typed, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number.
Mr. Ward, we heard you came downstairs last night. Miguel said you want to talk to us. If that's true, thank you.
Rosa Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Then slowly, painfully, beautifully, his chest warmed. He typed a reply. Tonight, I'll be there. He set down the phone. Outside his window, the city glowed, still indifferent, still enormous, still buzzing with the unbroken rhythm of lives rushing past one another. But inside his office, something had shifted. A realignment of purpose, a quiet ignition of resolve. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He felt the first steady breath he'd taken all day. And in the lingering stillness, he understood. Tonight would be the beginning of a confrontation far larger than anything he had faced in a boardroom. Tonight he would return to the tunnels, to the people, to the truth. Night returned to the Aurora Royal not with thunder or drama, but with a quietness that felt deliberate, like the city was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Ethan descended the service stairwell again, each step echoing faintly as if the hotel's bones themselves were aware of the shift inside him. He carried no laptop, no clipboard, no corporate armor, only a worn notebook, a pen, and a determination that felt steadier than anything he had held in years. When he reached the bottom, the air once again wrapped him in its mix of detergent, metal, and weary humanity. The corridor hummed with pipes overhead. Somewhere in the laundry wing, a machine rattled softly like an old cough. He approached the metal door at the end of the hallway and paused, not from hesitation, but from a strange sense of reverence. This room, crude and cramped, had become the moral center of a world he had once thought he understood. He knocked gently. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then the door opened. Rosa stood there, small, thin, her face lined with exhaustion that came from years of double shifts and nights with too little sleep. But tonight her eyes held something else. Not trust yet, but the fragile outline of it.
Mr. Ward, she whispered.
Please, Ethan said softly.
Call me Ethan.
Rosa blinked, startled. She stepped aside. Inside, the space was warmer than the night before. Someone had fixed the heater again. Miguel's handiwork was unmistakable. Blankets were arranged neatly. A few of the workers looked up as Ethan entered. Some instantly lowered their eyes. Others watched him with guarded suspicion. Miguel stood near the table where he had sat the previous night. When he saw Ethan, he didn't smile, but he didn't tense either. His expression held something in between, a cautious acceptance. "You came," Miguel said.
I said I would.
Miguel nodded and gestured to the crate across from him. "Sit." Ethan sat, folding his hands, the notebook resting on his knee. "Thank you for letting me come," he began. But Miguel shook his head. "We didn't let you," he said. "We chose to trust you. A little." The distinction hit Ethan harder than any accusation could have. Rosa and 3 others gathered around, forming a loose circle, close enough to listen, far enough to flee if this turned into a trap. 2 more workers remained lying down, half asleep after long shifts. Ethan opened his notebook. He looked at the faces around him. Faces marked by fatigue, hope, grief, resilience. People who had been invisible to him for too long. "I'm here to listen," he said quietly. "Not as a CEO. As someone who should have been paying attention all along." Silence stretched thin beneath the soft glow of the lanterns. Then Rosa spoke first.
My rent went up last year, she said quietly. I couldn't pay. I tried to switch shifts, but the manager said no. I slept in the locker room for 3 nights. When they found me, they fired me from the daytime rotation and pushed me to nights. Her voice trembled only once. If not for Miguel, she whispered, I would have had nowhere. Ethan wrote her words down with shaking hands. Another worker, Tomas, spoke next. A dishwasher with burns up his arms, scars like pale rivers. They schedule us 14 hours, he said. Then they say meal break is mandatory on the log. But we never stop. If we stop, plates pile, the chef screams, and we get written up. His jaw tightened. We eat bread from the trash bin. Ethan's pen froze mid-word. Miguel stepped forward slightly as if protecting Tomas from whatever response might come. But Ethan only nodded, eyes heavy with a shame he could no longer outrun. A tall, older man, Javier, rubbed his knees as he spoke. No one checked the laundry ventilation in years. My chest burns. Rosa coughs all night. We reported it many times. Supervisor said it's normal. Normal, Rosa repeated softly, bitterly. Miguel shifted his weight. No one wanted to cause trouble. When we speak up, they say we complain too much. They say others would take our jobs if we are difficult. Ethan felt the words lodge deep. He closed the notebook. Everything you're telling me, he said softly, is wrong. Not wrong because it breaks policy. Wrong because it breaks people. No one spoke. The room held a fragile, trembling stillness. Ethan continued, voice lower now. I'm not asking you to trust all my promises. Words are cheap. But I will change the rules. I will change the conditions. I will change the culture. Rosa's eyes shone, but her voice remained cautious. How? Managers don't listen. Supervisors punish us quietly. They will find new ways. I know, Ethan said, which is why the changes won't start with them. They will start with me. Miguel folded his arms, not confrontational, simply steady. What exactly are you planning? Ethan met his gaze. I'm forming a new internal task force, he said. Independent, no supervisors, no managers, a direct line to me. Miguel frowned. Who will be on it? You, Ethan said. Miguel blinked, stunned. Me? You know the system better than anyone, Ethan continued. You've lived its failures. You've found solutions without resources. You've held people together when the hotel didn't. Miguel looked down, shaken. I'm a cleaner. You're a leader, Ethan said simply. More than anyone I've promoted in years. The room went still. Rosa's mouth parted in amazement. Tomas glanced at Miguel with quiet pride. Even the exhausted workers half asleep at the back opened their eyes. Miguel breathed slowly, deeply. If I agree, what happens to them? He gestured to the workers surrounding him. They get protections, Ethan said. Real protections, paid breaks, safe conditions, a monitored grievance process, a dormitory proposal revived, and wage corrections. He paused. And no one, absolutely no one, will retaliate against them. Miguel swallowed hard, and Ethan realized the man was not afraid of responsibility. He was afraid of hope. You mean this? Miguel whispered. With everything I have, Ethan said. Miguel stared at him, searching for cracks in the promise, for any sign of deception or naivety. But Ethan let himself be seen, fully, honestly, without armor. Finally, Miguel nodded once. Then I'll help you. The words moved through the room like a small, quiet miracle. Rosa exhaled sharply, covering her mouth. Tomas bowed his head as if releasing a weight from his shoulders. Javier closed his eyes, whispering something that might have been a prayer. Ethan felt his own breath leave him in a tremor he had not expected. Thank you, he said softly. Miguel nodded again. But Ethan, his voice dropped. If you do this, the managers will fight. The supervisors will fight harder. And the board will have to catch up, Ethan said. A rare smile tugged at Miguel's lips, tired but real. Outside the small window, the city lights flickered like distant signals. Inside, the lantern cast a golden circle around a group of people who had once been invisible, now finally seen. Ethan rose slowly. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. Bring whatever you want me to review first. Names, incidents, anything. Miguel nodded. We'll be ready. As Ethan stepped to the door, he paused, looking back at the room that had altered him. He had entered as a man hunting a thief. Now he left as a man who had finally understood what needed to be stolen back. Their dignity, their safety, their voice. He pushed the door open. The boardroom on the 41st floor had always intimidated people. Its walls were glass, its table a single polished slab of dark walnut stretching almost the entire length of the room. The city glittered below like a field of diamonds, beautiful, distant, unbothered. In this room, decisions were made about profits, expansions, partnerships. In this room, human stories usually dissolved into numbers. Ethan entered with a calm he did not fully feel. Every board member was already seated. Their tailored suits caught the morning light like armor. At the far end, Chairwoman Linton tapped her pen slowly, her expression carved from stone. Mr. Ward, she said without warmth. We've read your memo. She slid a thick stack of paper across the table. His proposed reforms, break enforcement, wage corrections, overnight rest facilities, reinstatement review for unfairly terminated staff, and the appointment of a night shift advisory leader. Miguel's name sat boldly on the first page. We are concerned, Linton continued. Very concerned. Ethan took a seat, folding his hands. Then let's talk. The CFO, a man who treated spreadsheets like gospel, leaned forward. These changes will cost us a fortune.
They will save us a soul, Ethan replied. A scoff rippled through the room. Chairwoman Linton did not blink. We don't run this hotel on sentiment. No, Ethan said. You run it on the labor of people whose lives you've never seen. Careful, someone muttered. But Ethan no longer felt the old fear. The fear of disappointing the powerful, of disrupting the system that had raised him. That fear had dissolved the moment he stepped into the laundry room and saw a truth he could never unsee. He opened his notebook. Our night staff sleeps on the floor, he said. They work 14-hour shifts without breaks. They are punished for resting. They are evicted, threatened, and quietly replaced when they speak up. A director waved a hand dismissively. We cannot manage workers' personal choices. If they mismanage their finances, this is not mismanagement, Ethan said, sharper now. This is exploitation. Chairwoman Linton raised an eyebrow. Strong word. A true one, Ethan replied. The board exchanged glances, uneasy, annoyed, disbelieving. Finally, the COO asked, Are you telling us, Ethan, that we are villains? No, Ethan said. I'm saying we are blind, and that we have a chance to see. Silence. Then Ethan continued, steady and clear. I am implementing these changes. All of them. Linton leaned back, voice cold. You do not act alone. You answer to this board. Not on matters of safety, Ethan said, or human dignity. That is not how this company is run, the CFO snapped. Then it's time to change how it's run, Ethan said. A murmur spread, shock, anger, disbelief. The chairwoman's voice turned quiet, deadly quiet. If you push this, you risk your position. Ethan met her gaze. I know. And you still insist? Yes, Ethan said softly. Because if leading this hotel requires me to ignore the suffering that sustains it, then I never deserved the title. For the first time, a crack appeared in the board's veneer, not agreement, but uncertainty. Numbers could be countered, but conviction, that was harder. Linton exhaled slowly. We will vote. Ethan's heart pounded, but he nodded. Then vote. One by one, they cast their decisions. Some voted against him, predictably, rigidly. Some hesitated. A few, surprisingly, voted in favor, swayed not by profit but by Ethan's clarity. The final tally hung in the air. Not victory, not defeat. Split, deadlocked. Chairwoman Linton, as always, held the deciding vote. She stared at Ethan a long, long moment, her face unreadable. You believe you are doing the right thing, she said softly. I know I am, Ethan answered. And you are willing to risk everything for people who have nothing. Yes, Ethan whispered. Because they deserve more than nothing. Something subtle shifted in her eyes, something almost like a memory flickering behind steel. Then she set down her pen. I vote in favor. Gasps broke across the room. Ethan did not move, did not breathe. Chairwoman Linton turned the papers toward him. Implement your reforms, but understand, if you fail, the responsibility is yours alone. I accept that, Ethan said. Then this meeting is adjourned. The board members left with hurried, fractured glances, some troubled, some resentful, a few thoughtful. Ethan remained seated for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle, the weight of change that was now real, not theoretical. The reforms were approved, the culture could shift, and the night staff would no longer stand alone in the dark. His phone buzzed. A message from Miguel. We are in the laundry room. Everyone is waiting. Did it work? Ethan smiled, heart tight. Yes, he typed back. We start today. He left the boardroom and took the service elevator down, past the luxury floors, past the offices, past the guest suites, into the quiet corridors where no one with power ever walked. The laundry room door opened before he reached it. Dozens of faces stood inside, tired, anxious, bracing themselves for disappointment. Miguel stepped forward. "Well?" Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. "It's done," he said. The board agreed. For a moment, silence. Then Rosa covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling instantly. Tomas let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Javier muttered a prayer of gratitude. Miguel's eyes shimmered, though he tried to hide it. "You did it," he whispered. "No," Ethan said gently. "We did." The workers gathered around him, not in celebration, not loudly, but in a circle of warmth so overwhelming Ethan felt something inside him finally settle. For once, he did not feel like a CEO. He felt like a man standing exactly where he was meant to be. "I promised you light," Ethan said quietly, "and this is only the beginning." Miguel nodded, voice soft. "Then let's build the rest together." Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that comes not from triumph, but from purpose reclaimed. Outside, the night shift prepared to begin. Inside, dignity was returning, one breath at a time. And though this chapter of their lives closed on a victory, Ethan knew the story would continue, not in grand gestures, but in every repaired vent, every safe meal, every fair schedule, every night someone slept warm for the first time in months. Change had begun in the shadows. Now, at last, it would learn how to live in the light.